Hello and welcome to the sports show. I kind of dropped the ball on making our opening thing shorter. I also didn't really feel like looking for it. So we are
No
back to
cases.
our we're going back to our raw dogging intros. So we missed last week. Um Nate had family over and then we missed yesterday. I had a middle school choir concert to go to. It's thrilling stuff. So,
Oh yeah.
we're here. We're good. We're healthy. We're happy. We're especially happy after that Raiders spanking. I didn't realize it had been 2 years since we beat the Raiders.
No, it was well. I think it was since 2020. Actually, I think it's been 4 years.
Yeah, no, you're right. Because for some reason I thought we were going against the Raiders 4 times in a year. I knew it was,
Four
yeah,
times.
I knew it was 8 games. I just apparently forget how.
That'd be crazy.
Yeah, I mean you can go against a team 3 times. I guess you could
Yeah.
feasibly go against a team 4 times in a year.
What we count preseason?
Yeah, if you do preseason, no, yeah, preseason, they're in your same division, and in playoffs.
Yeah, that'd be the most.
I don't think that's ever happened in the history of the NFL.
I feel like that's probably happened. Random preseason game and then
Maybe.
division team, something like that. But yeah, it was a great win. I think I was telling Jay that's probably the best win I've seen in years since I think Drew Lock might have had one win that was like kind of impressive, maybe in 2019. But
Yeah, I mean,
other than that, that's all I can think of.
pre Pat Shermer, Drew Lock had a lot of potential. I don't necessarily think he had any like good games. Because really, when you think about it, like early Drew Lock was probably really similar to early uh,
He
Josh Allen.
he had a couple. I remember one in particular was against like the Texans or something, and he had a really good game. We won that game that first year that we tried him out. So there was a few, but it was all from that first year. Um,
God, did you move or something?
what do you mean?
Your voice was so clear, it now sounds like you're yelling in a bathroom.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Should I go back a little bit? Is this better?
Well, we'll see. At least you're not disconnecting now, so that's
Yeah,
um.
just can't have it perfect for this bad boy here.
I'll do sirens, and I'm
Wait, we
telling you,
got
I can,
sirens?
dude, I can hear everything off your microphone.
Why is this like a podcast mic? You can hear everything around you.
It's a podcast mic if you soundproof your home, I guess.
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I don't think we had any good games with Flacco or Keenum. Bridgewater, we probably had a few good games with Bridgewater when we had him. I remember thinking that he was pretty good, but just needs to get a little bit better. We also that was also at the time when our play calling and our like offensive schemas were just probably the most boring that they've ever been
which is,
since the Tebow era.
I mean, Bridgewater is a very boring player, but
Yeah.
I just feel like I haven't seen us have a lead 34-10 at one point, which should have been the final score to be honest. But anyway, but I haven't seen us have a lead like that in a long time. So hopefully that's good thing or good sign moving forward. Bo Nix played well overall. I kind of struggled in the beginning, but had a pretty good second half. 19 for 27, two passing touchdowns, 206 yards, one rushing touchdown. Um, he had that argument with Sean Payton on the sideline, and everyone was freaking out when they first saw that, including me. I was like, "Oh, what's going on?" I was kind of confused. But just after what they said in the press conference afterwards, it was just kind of like we're comfortable with each other. We can say this kind of stuff, and we're good afterwards. Love each other, kind of thing. So
Yeah, I mean,
honestly, it kind of reminds me of you know Sean Payton, Drew Brees. To be honest, is kind of what it reminds me of.
yeah, I mean, the commentators were talking about how they liked seeing that because I guess Drew Brees said in an interview where Sean Payne will coach you hard. You have to not coach. I don't remember what word he used. Oh, he said like Sean Payne will treat you tough, and you have to be tough right back to him.
Yeah.
And it was fun seeing all of the great um, super cuts of Bo Nix yelling at Sean Payton, smashed with last year when Russell Wilson was just sitting there taking it.
Which I mean, sometimes you do just want to take it for sure. You can't just like snap back at everything, right? But you
Yeah,
also like it was like never like it was just there was like never any of that fire to do that. I feel like,
and
and you want to see a little bit of that.
it's clear that I was still as respectful as you can be when you're yelling at someone. It reminded me of Peyton Manning yelling at Jeff Saturday. Like they both obviously have a lot of respect for each other, and in the heat of the moment, they get into a pretty big argument about it. Um,
Yeah, and Davis Webb or that assistant coach was definitely on Bo's side because he started yelling at Sean Payton as well, kind of just like like calm down or like he's right kind of thing or something like that. So yeah, it was all just part of like that team building kind of thing. So
yeah, I mean,
but yeah,
I don't know if we make the playoffs. Just I broke down in a separate chat. Sorry, Nate. I broke down what the Broncos have to do to make it to the playoffs. Um, and they basically if they split the Chargers and the Chiefs, which I don't know if that would happen. I think we could realistically sweep the Chargers and the Raiders and then get swept by the Chiefs, and it would be the same results. Um, but being realistic and not a super fan of the Broncos, it feels like we're primed to win 9 games this year, go 9-8, and I don't think that's going to be good enough to make a wild card spot.
I don't know. I don't know if that's. I think you're about right. I think 9-10 wins is kind of what we're looking at. Um, which I think I was definitely saying in the beginning of the season that I would not have been surprised if we got to 9 or 10.
Yeah,
But yeah, I'm not just gonna just sit here and like, okay, we're gonna be in the playoffs now. Like, okay, it's all seven. We still got a lot of growing to go, to do. Where the defense is great. Vance Joseph has had quite the turnaround in the past year after that 70-point game against the Dolphins last year. So defense has really stepped up. But our issue or our um, maybe concern moving forward is just making sure we get the offense just you know started like you're starting fast in the beginning versus like taking like a lot of time to kind of get going. We need more, just some big plays. Like I haven't seen too many big Cortland Sutton plays, or even like that big play that Troy Franklin dropped would have been like 50-yard touchdown pass. Pretty good throw from Bo Nix, but dropped it. We just got to make those plays. And I think once we do get the running game going a little more with Javante, who's kind of trying to figure out his way right now, um, I think we'll at least be, you know, somewhere that wild card range towards the end of the season.
yeah, and I think what really hurts is both the Seahawks game and the Steelers game were both winnable. Probably more so the Seahawks game. Um,
I think we were up most of that game too.
and if we were, if we're 3-2, or sorry, if we're 4-1 instead of 3-2, I think that's a completely different story, right? Being only one game behind Casey instead of two, especially given how easy our schedule is. We have the Chargers, who have not, we'll talk about the Chargers a little bit later. Chargers have not looked very impressive. The Saints have just dropped off the face of the earth somehow. Plus, it's a grudge
Yeah,
game for Sean Payton. And then the Panthers, I very easily could see us being 6-2, 5-3 at worst if we drop either the Chargers or the Saints game. I don't think we lose both of them. I think there's a chance we could lose one.
I
Um,
agree.
and then after that, though, we have a string of hard games because we got the Ravens, who, boy, are they playing like what I thought the Ravens were going to be.
Yeah, and they are.
Well, I guess what most people thought the Ravens were going to be. I didn't think the Ravens were going to be very good this year, and they're proving me wrong. We've got the Ravens, we've got the Chiefs, we've got the Falcons, who for some reason has remembered how to play football again.
Kirk
Um,
Cousins, 509 yards. Jesus.
yeah, and then we've got the Browns, which who knows what happens with the Browns by December, right? Maybe Deshaun Watson gets benched, but
We should win that game though. But
their defense is kind of well. I think their
no,
defense is kind of scary, but I don't know if it's
I
any
don't. Last year
scarier.
it was.
Yeah, because
Last year it was. This year's pretty good.
I was looking up the Jet stats today. I was arguing with someone on the internet. Um, I didn't realize how good the Jets defense was. Holy cow! Yeah, I mean, I think the Browns and the Bengals games are probably the two biggest question marks for me personally. You know, the Browns, both those teams, a lot can happen between now and December. And I feel like both of those teams really close to uh are really close to being pretty good teams. Um, I just don't know because Amari Cooper has been pretty bad this year,
Yeah.
and I just don't think Jerry Judy has it in him to beat Pat Surtain.
Yeah. I mean, there's no Pat Surtain's gonna eat him alive.
So, but I think that's probably enough Broncos talk. We'll have a more dedicated Broncos episode some point in the future. Usually, this is about the time we would do it. But I kind of want to just watch them. I want to see what they do.
See what they do. Let's see if Surtain keeps it up. I think he's kind of like a dark horse defensive player of the year candidate now after this big game. So we'll
I don't know
see.
about Dark Horse, man. He's
Straight up.
he's one of the first shutdown cornerbacks I've seen since Revis retired.
I would agree. I think I've been hearing a lot, just from like people who've been talking about it, that they think it's Sertan like up there, and then everyone else below. Even Sauce Gardner, they're like, Sauce Gardner's good, but he like pulls a lot. He's not as fast. He's not as shifty.
Well,
Most people are thinking Sertan's like the guy. So
and I didn't really realize this, especially because during the Steelers game, Sertan got called for pass interference and holding multiple times against George Pickens, who I don't think George Pickens is a top 10 receiver in the NFL.
I don't
Um,
think so either.
and I was like, man, because I remember Sertan's rookie year, he gave up 0 big plays. It was like Sertan had given up 0 20 plus yard plays his rookie year, something like that.
Yeah.
And then last year he he was slowly, I don't want to use the word regressing, but honestly it's regressing because he started off so good. Um and started regressing a little bit last year, last 2 years. Um so my before this game, I thought Sertan was great, but not the best. I didn't realize he only has 7 targets this year over five
Yeah.
games.
No, I mean, I get where you're coming from, though. I would say the last 3 games, not so much, but the first 2 games, there were definitely times where and even some of the Tampa game at the very beginning, like, there were times where I was looking at it and I was like, you know what? Like Sertan's, like, getting beat a little bit. But maybe it was just more so because we never expected him to get beat. Same thing as we thought about Bailey, right? Where, like,
Yeah,
Bailey gets beat one time in the game or whatever you want to call it. It's like, oh my god, like I got beat. But it's like
he's
you just said,
washed.
yeah, exactly. Like you just said, it's literally just been what 7 times, and we just countered every single time that we saw it. So the last 3 games, he's had a huge resurgence, like back to like his rookie year, Patrick Surtain. So
Yeah, and I
go ahead.
think one of the things with Pat Surtain that's not really stated enough, he doesn't have a lot of turnovers, right? This is his first turnover since 2022, I think is what they were saying.
I think he had one last year, but yeah,
Yeah, he had one interception last year.
and then now he's got 3, I think, or
He's
two.
at 2.
Okay, so he had 2 in just the last game, but yeah.
But I think when you look at like previous between, cuz you and I have talked about before how it seems like we don't really see corners like Revis or Champ Bailey anymore. And the list goes on. There was Austin Wall was good at his prime for
like 2 years.
yeah. Even like Chris Harris, but Pat Surtain is one of the and then so between them to now, we've had people like Sauce Gardner. We've had people like Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah.
Um, maybe even you could throw in like Patrick Peterson. He's not a cornerback, but like Justin Simmons.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Patrick Peterson was really good. He had like a 2 year stretch where he was like locked down, in my opinion, but never to that Bailey Revis level.
Yeah, and what I was gonna say is the like crazy thing is they all usually have really high interception numbers, right?
Usually.
But they also get beat pretty frequently. Even Jalen Ramsey, like at his peak, was still getting beat. No, I don't want to say regularly, but he wasn't getting 7 targets in 5 games, right? Like they would still challenge him. I think, I think you've called him before when we talked about this off podcast that Jalen Ramsey is just a ball hawk. His
Right.
pass protection is okay. I think a lot of good cornerbacks right now have okay pass protection, but they're still challenged multiple times. The stat that I thought was really crazy, excuse me, is Darrell Revis and Calvin Johnson, you know, best cornerback versus the best wide receiver in recent memory. I don't know if I would still consider Calvin Johnson the best recent wide receiver. I think I still would.
I could see that maybe. Yeah.
But at the time, best cornerback versus the best wide receiver, and they only played one game against each other where they were both healthy. So they've had other games where they like played against each other, but Calvin Johnson was either like dealing with an injury or Darrell Reeves was dealing with an injury. They had one game where they were fully healthy, and Calvin Johnson had one catch for like 4 yards. Um, and he was only targeted like 6 times that game.
I think if it's best corner versus best receiver, I think best corner wins that like all the time, in my opinion.
It depends on the corner, right? Because if it's someone like Jalen Ramsey, where he's mostly just gonna be fighting you for the ball.
Well, no, I'm just saying in your example of like
Oh,
the best corner at that time versus the best receiver at that time, aka like Bailey in the 2000s and then Revis in early 2010s. Um, even like Deion Sanders back in the 90s and stuff. Like, I feel like the corner is going to beat the receiver. Like, there's been tons of stories where it's like Michael Irvin or Jerry Rice, but Deion's like locking them down, or
yeah,
like even Champ like against like all those great receivers in the 2000s and Marvin Harrison and stuff like that. Like he was locking them down, and then Revis with Calvin, which is crazy because Calvin's like got like 5 inches on him or 6 inches on him
yeah.
or something like that, and he's still locking him down. Um, so yeah, I think best corner um, beats best receiver.
But
And
I don't know if that
and
would have been true 5 years ago.
like you mean who was the best corner 5 years ago versus like the best receiver?
Yeah,
Well, I mean, it depends who we think is the best corner 5 years. I mean, Stephon Gilmore won Defensive Player of the Year
yeah.
one year, like 5 years ago, four. So I mean, I would take him over whoever. Yeah, he was really good.
I don't. Who would be the best receiver 5 years ago? What did the NFL look like before COVID?
Man, yeah, I'm trying to like who was the best receiver five?
Was it
I
like
think
Jamar?
Odell was kind of still there.
I think I think he's I think he's a little overrated.
Um, I mean, maybe who? I'm
Let's
trying
see.
to think. I mean,
Most passing receptions was Michael Thomas.
oh yeah, who's like gone now, vanished. Who else? Who's like top five?
I'm just looking at the regular season statistical leader. I I I was a little surprised to see Michael Thomas there. I haven't really thought about him in a while.
Well, he's been out. Yeah, he's gone now.
Um,
2019 receiving leaders.
I guess I can look up on Pro Football. Yeah, but I just feel like it's so fun watching Pat Surtain play versus like when Jalen Ramsey was on the Rams during their Super Bowl win. Obviously, that was pretty fun to watch too. Um, Aqib Talib when he was on the Broncos was pretty fun to watch too. But it's just a little
Oh
bit
yeah,
different
yeah, he was. Oh yeah,
to watch a player dominate so hard that you can't that the quarterback doesn't even feel comfortable throwing it to you. Holy cow! Number two receiver that year, 2019.
Julio Jones.
No, it was Christian McCaffrey.
Well, that
I'm
was
looking at yards.
reception. Well, no, that's receptions. He had more. He had the second most
Or
receptions.
yeah. Julio
But yeah,
Jones.
Julio got second. So yeah, that's the one. That's the. Yeah, he was probably the best receiver for a good like 5 year stretch after Calvin, in my opinion. Um.
Yeah, I don't know if I
So
would take Julio over Stephon Gilmore. Actually, I think you're right.
uh, no, I think I would take Stephon to be honest. Or whoever else whoever's like the top two or three corners. So
I didn't realize that Stephon was still playing. I'm not gonna lie. I knew he
yeah,
played last year.
he's older than us too. It's kind of crazy.
Gilly Lock. I've never heard anyone call him Gilly Lock before.
Right.
So
Um. Do we want to head on to the Jets? We kind of got sidetracked there with corners like we always do tonight.
Um, actually, before we get to the Jets, and I don't want to actually talk about this today. I want to talk about this next week when we have a little bit more time. Um, but I did. This is a good week to kind of bring it up of playing through injuries or injured players. We've obviously seen Tua getting hurt again this year. Um, Depending on your views on the whole matter, there's a slight controversy or a pretty big controversy with Josh Allen coming back 6 minutes after taking a pretty bad hit and falling down. Was very clearly knocked unconscious. Somehow passes concussion protocols in 6 minutes, and maybe most controversially, you can see him getting smelling salts right before coming back onto the field. Obviously, not a very good look. But even outside of concussions, this is the second week in so many weeks where we've seen Aaron Rodgers going down hurt. Not with a head injury, but I think both times it was a leg injury and it's playing through. And we've seen a lot of injuries this year already, and people playing through it. Probably most notable for you and me is Alex Singleton playing with a torn ACL against Tampa Bay, which I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah, I saw that like in a press conference or something, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
So I do want to talk about this more next week, but I just wanted to bring it up today. One, so that you can keep me accountable and remember that this is something I wanted to talk about next week. But two, because I just wanted to say before we move on to the next topic, I hope that we can stop normalizing playing through injuries. And I know I'm part of the problem too because one of my favorite quarterbacks right now is Matthew Stafford. And when he asks me, "Hey, what do you like about Matthew Stafford so much?" I say the words, "Oh, he's tough," and I always point to the game where he's playing with the Lions and he's playing through a dislocated shoulder. Granted, it's only one play. I thought it was really cool that Alex Singleton was able to play on a torn ACL, but I think that's something that we should stop trying to normalize and stop saying and start saying this is a problem. I don't want to see these players ending their careers short. Like it sucks seeing what happened to Andrew Luck, right? Where he's just getting hurt and he's playing through injuries and then getting hurt and playing through injuries before he finally goes, I'm just not having fun anymore. It's not worth it for me to keep breaking my body. I can play through these injuries, but I don't want to. So we'll talk more about this next week. Um, when we have a little bit more time. Also, you can think about it a little bit more. But
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say real quick before we move on. I would just say like, yeah, it depends on the interview. Sorry, on the injury. Like, yeah, I mean, if it's like a big, like a head injury and concussion related or something like that, or a ligament is torn, also looking to do that. But yeah, anything that's kind of major head injury, ligament injury, like yeah, you can't force players to do that.
Yeah, and it's such a like arbitrary thing, right? Like I don't necessarily think it was a wrong for Matthew Stafford to try playing when he had to dislocate his shoulder, but I don't think that because he won the game. He was able to make the throw. They won the game. He's a hero. Would I think the same thing if he took a sack instead and now he can't play anymore? I don't know. But on the opposite spectrum, there's stuff like what happened with Deshaun Watson last year, where he didn't play for a lot of he would start games that he wouldn't finish because of these arbitrary injuries that just kept quote unquote happening. And ultimately with Deshaun Watson, he ended up not finishing out the season, so maybe some of those injuries were more serious than I thought. But you are playing a physical sport. You have to expect to get hit. If you don't want to get hit, maybe you shouldn't be playing. I'm sorry, Blaine Gabbert. No one realized that was me making fun of him, but it is what it is. But speaking of injuries and coming back from it, playing through injuries and whatnot, Aaron Rodgers. I was so surprised that you text me this list right at 10. I guess 11:30 for you in the morning. But an hour before that, I saw the headline. Salah fired. I think I have the. Yes, I hear about that at 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock your time. An hour and a half later, you don't even mention that as one of your topics. Um, I think
Yeah,
this topic was the biggest reason why I wanted to have the podcast today. It's relevant, and I think you and I both have a lot of things to say about it.
yeah. I texted Jay like just literally just a few bullet point topics, and one of them is just like Aaron Rodgers. Like, is he is he done kind of thing? Like, whatever, right? But I guess Robert Sala had been fired like an hour before that. I had no idea. So Jay was like, he was just like, "What about Sala?" And before that, before I even knew, I was just like, I mean, sure, we can talk about him too. Kind of just like, as a casual thing that I realized he was fired. So, but yeah, Robert Sala fired. After 5 games, or yeah, they're 2-3, right? I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
after 5 games, and I guess like 2.5 years with the Jets. So it's just like, first of all, the Jets are just, they just fire like a coach. I swear to God, like every like 2 to 3 years. You know what I mean? That's kind of like their mo is just firing coaches. So it doesn't surprise me. I'm actually a Rodgers guy, but this is kind of like it's an offensive thing why this team is struggling. Um, and you fire the guy who's actually behind. He's a defensive coach behind like their defense, which you had kind of teased earlier is actually playing really well. So pretty surprising in that sense. I mean, there were rumors that Salah was going to relieve Nathaniel Hackett of his play calling duties, and maybe this is why he got fired. Who knows what's true, what's not? Rogers came on to the Pat McAfee show today and was like, he basically denied everything. It was like none of it's true. I wasn't aware of anything. Like I didn't know it was going to happen. All this stuff, and I don't know. I really don't know what to believe. Uh, you would think a major like athlete like as big as Aaron Rodgers would be privy to this kind of information prior to, or would have discussions too about this kind of stuff. But I don't know. What do you think? Do you think Rodgers was aware of any of this going into it?
I was actually going to go into my speculations later, a little bit later, because I want to start off with like hard facts, right? Like stuff that we can definitively say this is the truth. So definitively, we can say that I want to call the owner Woody Harrelson. I know that's not his name.
Woody Johnson,
Yeah, he has never fired a coach mid-season.
right?
Um, and this includes Adam Gase, who went 0-13 before firing Greg Williams. He fired Greg Williams, the defensive coordinator, for throwing a game against the Raiders before ultimately ending 2-14, and he was fired the day their season ended. He was fired, but he was still able to finish out the season, right? Saleh was given 5 weeks this year. It was maybe you can argue that he would have been fired midseason last year had Aaron Rodgers not gotten hurt. Whatever. I don't want to speculate that part. But he gets fired when the Jets are only one game behind the Bills. And granted, well, no, and they knew that, right? Because he gets fired on Tuesday. Bills lost their game Sunday after they lost their London game. And I as I mentioned earlier, I looked up some stats for the Jets because I was arguing about this. Um, is I think it's really easy to compare Saleh to Staley in terms of they're both defensive minded coaches. They both have been struggling on the offensive side of things. But the difference is Staley was bottom 10 in most passing metrics last year. So he wasn't doing anything on the offensive side of things, and he wasn't doing anything on the defensive side of things. Saleh has the best they have the third best total yards allowed. They have the second best total passing yards allowed. They're 16th in rushing yards. They allow the lowest amount of yards per offensive play. They're 6th in quarterback pressures and 8th in points allowed. So those are all pretty good numbers for a defense. And it just feels weird to me, and this is where I'll go into speculation. It just feels weird to me that he's the one that gets fired and not Nathaniel Hackett, who's calling the offense. Not Todd, who Saleh was wanting to have call the offense, but it's Saleh, and I don't think it's much of a coincidence that Rodgers has very publicly been not very happy with Saleh or the coaching staff as a whole. I also don't think that it's a weird coincidence that, and I don't know if you remember this because I almost forgot about it too. The Jets there was a informant inside the Jets who was leaking a bunch of stuff about Saleh, and one of the things that he said was Nathaniel Hackett is an idiot and doesn't know what he's doing. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I don't think they ever figured out who that was.
And so, if this was an isolated incident, I think it would be easier for me to say, oh yeah, we're just we're blaming Aaron Rodgers because he still wants to play the old school style of football where he's allowed to check out of plays or audible out of plays. But it's not. He got Mike McCarthy fired, which I didn't know this, but Mike McCarthy was the offensive coordinator on the 49ers when they chose to take Alex Smith over him in that draft. But he again very publicly was very against Mike McCarthy. Eventually Mike McCarthy got fired mid-season, despite the fact that at the time people thought that he was still one of the best head coaches in the league. And then he tells the Green Bay organization to get Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur has to change the way he does offenses because Aaron Rodgers doesn't like that. And then starts demanding trades, starts demanding, these contract extensions, and gets them. But still, despite that, he still doesn't want to play for Matt LaFleur anymore. He again very publicly did not like Matt LaFleur and threatened to retire from football to become the Jeopardy host. Threatened to retire from football and become the vice president for Kennedy Jr. Even threatened to just sit on the bench because he just did not want to play for Matt LaFleur, despite the fact that Green Bay was offering him a second extension, even though his contract still had years on it. And then, at the end of 2022, demands that he gets traded to the Jets, who had just hired Nathaniel Hackett, who we know from the Jets' leaked information doesn't actually know much about football. And does at least according to Sela, according to these leaks, according to Sela. Um, and so I and we also know that Woody Johnson talked to Aaron Rodgers the day before on the phone, and it's weird to me that that phone call wouldn't have anything there about we're going to let Sela go. Even if Aaron Rodgers didn't directly say I want Sela to get fired, it's a little weird that you would call your quarterback less than 24 hours before you're going to fire someone and not mention that. It's also weird to me that Sela has to be taken out, escorted out by security when Adam Gase didn't. When that didn't happen to Adam Gase, um, that didn't happen to who was the previous head coach for New York Jets before Gase. I don't know if that's even a list. I don't even know if that's something I could find easily. Oh, here it is. I just have to go through a bunch of Robert Sala stuff. So it didn't happen to Adam Gase, finished 9-23. Didn't happen to Todd Bowles, finished 24-40. Didn't happen to Rex Ryan, who, despite having early success, um, definitely is probably the catalyst of when the Jets started to become a joke organization. But Sala had to be escorted by security. It just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense, and it makes even less. It seems even more like Aaron Rodgers is hiding things when you consider the fact that Rodgers has. I guess I won't say lied because he technically didn't lie, but Rodgers did in the past mislead the media, mislead his team, and mislead the public during the whole COVID vaccination thing. Despite the fact that there were quarterbacks like Kirk Cousins who was playing without being vaccinated and openly not vaccinated, Aaron Rodgers knew what immunization meant to most people, and he knew that that's not what he meant, and he chose to mislead people anyway. So I think there's a lot of circumstantial evidence here to suggest that it was Aaron Rodgers. I'm not too worried for Sala. I think he we'll see what happens with the Jets after he gets fired. After he got fired, but you know, when you have a pile of turd team, the person responsible for the one bright spot is probably going to have a chance somewhere else.
Yeah. No, well, I do think with Robert Sala, I do think he's gonna, definitely get another job as a defensive coordinator ASAP. As a head coach, probably not. He'll need to redeem himself as a coordinator again. But I think for the 49ers, for example, the defense hasn't been as good this year as it has been. That'd be a good spot for him if they end the season and things are going well or something like that. But he'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
we've seen it before with Jack Del Rio, terrible head coach, great defensive coordinator. We're actively seeing it right now with Vance Joseph and Vic Fangio, both terrible head coaches, both doing really good as defensive coordinator.
for sure. He can definitely rebound back 100%. And with Rodgers, I do think it's not just Rodgers and any big star. I mean, LeBron's gotten like three coaches fired. Okay, you know, um, you know, even like uh, Jordan, Michael Jordan going up like telling the owner about like his first coach that he had and stuff like that. I mean, conversations are not just like just from the owner straight to the GM, and you have to just go straight down the line. Like they're going to talk to the star and get their opinion about things. Even Tom Brady, obviously not regarding firing Belichick or anything, but Kraft stepped in and made sure that Brady wasn't traded to the 49ers or something, for whatever the case may be.
Sure,
Um,
but
so yeah, I do think when there's like a star quarterback or a star involved, you can't help but think that they're going to be involved in like these with like basketball, I remember Giannis.
Dude, what are you slamming?
Is it loud?
Yeah.
I'm not. I'm just touching the laptop very gently.
It doesn't sound very gentle.
Oh wait, hang on. Is this connected?
It was not.
It got disconnected. My bad.
Oh my gosh, dude.
The sound.
We're gonna start the podcast over.
Just for the sound.
I'm just kidding.
Um.
No, okay, so I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay? Is Aaron Rodgers a champion though? LeBron James and Michael Jordan, we can extend this out to Kobe Bryant, to Shaq, to these greats, to these all-time greats. Tom Brady, although Tom Brady never got a head coach fired. I'm sure he played some role in some of the offense coordinators getting fired, but Aaron Rodgers has been to a single Super Bowl in 2010, 14 years ago. Is the only time he's made it to a Super Bowl. He hasn't made it to a conference game in 8 years. He hasn't won a playoff game in 5 years. He is.
That was your first year of college too.
He is 11-10 in the postseason, and I get that he's a good quarterback, right? But I struggle to see how he can demand to have all this stuff. Even if you're not comparing him to Brady or Patrick Mahomes, who, are outliers in their Super Bowl, in terms of Super Bowl, it's really hard to argue with the fact that he hasn't won a playoff game in 5 years, in 4 years.
Well, I think it's more so because they put so many resources.
But is it teams putting all those resources on Aaron Rodgers, or is it Aaron Rodgers wanting those resources for himself?
Well, that too. They've allowed him. They wanted those resources, and they've granted those things for him with Matt Hackett, and like Lazard coming on the team, Randall Cobb coming on the team, like stuff like that. So, I think they put so much effort into making this team work. Woody Johnson thinks this is like their best team in years from a talent perspective. I'm not sure if that's true. Like, I'm not sure. On paper, it might be, but it hasn't really shown it on the field yet. At least from an offensive perspective. But they put so much stuff, so much effort for this team to at least try to make a playoff run. That it's almost like this urgency. I feel like with Jets ownership that they have to get stuff done now. Now, firing Robert Saleh was that the move to kind of show the fans that there was a change. I guess so. We'll see what happens with it, but I think it's just the urgency. They paid Aaron all this money. He's not as good as he was, obviously, even just 3 years ago when he won the MVP back to back. He's not as good as that, but they've already put the resources to try to make this work, and they're gonna just see it through. I feel like.
But my issue with Aaron Rodgers is so many people, and I'm seeing this less and less now as it's becoming more and more apparent that Aaron Rodgers is a problem. 3 years ago when he was on Green Bay, he demanded the GM to get fired. And one of the things that he wanted built into his contract was that he would have some of the GM responsibilities, namely free agency and the draft. Which sounds reasonable on paper, right? You want your star player to be surrounded by people that he likes. But no other team has done that. You look at Brady or LeBron, who will vouch for, Brady with Gronkowski, LeBron with his son. They'll vouch for a player or two. You could make the argument that Burrows helped influence the Cincinnati Bengals to draft Jamar Chase, despite the fact that Jamar Chase didn't play. his last year in college because of COVID. So we see examples of, we'll call it like light nepotism throughout sports, but not to the extent that Aaron Rodgers was wanting Green Bay to do to make him happy. You know what? We even see this now where he's not really building a rapport with Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson won Offensive Rookie of the Year 3 years ago. He was basically the only person not named Brees Hall doing anything last year with Zach Wilson throwing it to him. And somehow Aaron Rodgers can't make Garrett Wilson look good. Instead, the number one receiver in the Jets right now just happens to be Adam Lazard. I mean, I was mostly joking when I texted you. The Jets should trade for Devontae Adams, and we should get something. We should get Garrett Wilson and just do a three-way trade. I don't know what we give to the Raiders because obviously we don't want to give them anything too valuable. But Garrett Wilson plus Cortland Sutton is a really dangerous tool. I think Garrett Wilson on basically any team besides the Texans, the 49ers, and like the healthy Rams improves the team immediately, right? Again, I don't think Garrett Wilson is necessarily a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. But I think he's top 15, top 16. I think he makes a very good number one receiver or, a really, really good number two receiver.
Yeah, I don't think he's a number one to be honest. I think he's a pretty good receiver. I think he'd be one of your best number two receivers in the league for sure. Um, so I'm not as high on Garrett Wilson as you are. Maybe I used to be. I think when I saw him in Ohio State, I really liked him. But I feel like in the NFL, although he hasn't had the best quarterback play, you know, I there's I could name like at least like you were saying 5, 10 receivers I'd probably take over him right now. But we're back to Rodgers. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's on him. The offense with him and Hackett, it's on them. Like it, they got to get this figured out, and Hackett is not the answer. Like he's not calling like the best plays or whatever. Like even in Green Bay, like Hackett wasn't the pure OC that was Stoll for. Yeah, that wasn't his job. So him calling the plays now is different than what it was in Green Bay. Um, so you know, at the same time, even though they fired Salah, I feel like this is gonna put all the pressure on Rodgers. Like, all right, well, we got this guy out. Now you got to perform, like, because this is a guy that maybe we thought was the issue, but since he's gone, the only issue that could be here now is you or like Hackett, someone on the offense, right? So we'll see where it goes. I mean, the DC Jeff Umbridge or
Ulbrich.
something like that. What's up?
Ulbrich.
Ulrich, my bad, is like now the new interim head coach. And he apparently is a really good DC and is one of those like rah rah guys like a Dan Campbell. So we'll see if that's what this team kind of responds to. But it's just kind of crazy. I mean, this team could be number one in that division, leading that division by Monday, and you just fired your head coach. So it's just kind of it's just kind of odd timing, 100%.
Yeah, and you know, I'm a huge let me look up statistics kind of guy. There is a pretty big influx of teams that win games right after firing their head coach, right? The next one or two games. There's a huge
Yeah,
bump over
you
that.
rally around that. You always rally around. Yeah.
There is not as much of teams finishing off the season strong after firing a head coach midseason, and there's been none who make the playoffs after firing a coach midseason.
Wow.
So
Yeah. I thought the Raiders did the Raiders do it the other year or no?
they've gone close.
It must have been just a game away or
Yeah,
They won a bunch of games last season with Derek Carr or whatever. Yeah.
but statistically speaking, teams who have a losing record, which is every team that fires their head coach, their team more often than not finishes below 500. So it's just
Yeah, the odds are definitely not with them with this.
so I don't.
Only thing I'll say is that it's early on in the season. You know, I feel like when some of these firings when they happen, it's kind of later on in the season, like middle to the end of the season when things are just not going their way. So I feel like this is a little bit different. That it's early. We'll have to see how it kind of plays out. But yeah, that's the only caveat I put in that.
Maybe we'll see. Um,
Do we want to chat about the Bengals real quick or wrap it up?
I'll leave that up to you. I guess we can let's wrap. We can rapid fire.
Okay.
We can rapid fire the rest of this episode.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure. Yeah. Let's rapid fire that.
Bengals are kind of in a tough spot. The Ravens are back up on their upswing, and the Steelers had a hot start. Bengals are currently 1 win. They're below the Browns, for goodness sake, and Deshaun Watson hasn't thrown a touchdown in 40 years. I know that's not actually true. Um,
Good one.
they're the whole game plan that the Bengals seem to have is I hope their team messes up one more time than our team messes up, and they don't really have anything past that. And I think this is going to be a do or die year for them because I'm not convinced that Jamar Chase is going to stay with the Bengals if the Bengals have that bad of a performance. Yes, they are slow starters. They've never been a 1-5 slow starting team with Joe Burrow healthy and Zach Taylor.
Zach Taylor.
Zach Taylor, I was close. He doesn't
Um.
deserve the A.
Well, you didn't have a solid two. You were saying Salah, but you don't like the Oz.
Is it Sala?
Yeah, solid.
I've been reading it
Um.
all day.
Very good. Well, I will say with the Bengals, the schedule is in their favor. The next four games, so they could be at least 500 after the next four games. What we got here is the at Giants, and the Giants had a good win last week, but it's still the Giants. So at Giants, at Browns, against Deshaun Watson, who hasn't thrown a touchdown pass in 40 years or games or whatever you said. At home against the Eagles, I think it's a winnable game. And then at home against the Raiders before they go up against the Ravens again. So I think they could be, honestly, I could see them going four in a row until they get to the Ravens. And, from there, we'll see what happens. So, in my opinion, they are not out of the race still. Burrow is playing lights out. I mean, he was like 30 for 39, five touchdowns, 389 yards, something like that, against that really good Baltimore Ravens defense. So Burrow's like balling. It's just the Bengals defense isn't as good. The offense hasn't been like good at critical times at times because he did have that turnover towards the end of the game against the Ravens. So they got to clean a few things up, but I'm still a Bengals believer. The Saints, maybe not so much anymore. I was a big Saints guy like two games in. But the Bengals, I'm still on the bandwagon.
All right. Last thing I'll say before we move on to the next team. I don't think Giants is a free game. Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes,
That's what I said.
against against a good against a good Seattle defense. Although I'm starting to question that belief after the last 2 weeks. 23 for 34, 257 yards, 2 touchdowns. They don't have Saquon Barkley anymore, and they didn't have Neighbors.
Yeah, fair.
So I don't, you know,
It's not. It's not going to be a gimme game, but I still pick the Bengals over the
because I
Giants.
can as easily as you see them going 4-0, I can see them going 2-2. I don't know if they go 1-3,
Way to beat Debbie Downer, dude.
but I'm concerned for the Bengals team. What does it take to get Zach Taylor fired? I guess is a bigger question.
J1 Zach Taylor out.
I do. Um, how about the Bills? The Bills had a hot start. again, we'll talk more about the injury next week, but the Bills are not going to be as explosive as they have been. As good as their receiving core is, it is no Stephon Diggs. Um, they've always struggled with the running game, which is how you wear down opponents. That's how you open up the passing game. We're seeing poor time management, obviously, this past week, but even just throughout the year. And we've seen them digging themselves into these big holes all year that they have to figure out ways to dig themselves out of. And while I think they're still going to go to the playoffs because Miami has a slow start, the Jets are actively imploding right now. And who knows when the Patriots is going to learn how to throw the ball. Although they are putting in Drake May against one of the best.
Are they? They have to.
Dude, not this week. They shouldn't put Drake May in this week. They're going. They're going against the Texans, the number one pass defense Texans. Rushing, they have one of the highest blitz successes. Yeah, they're throwing into something. The Bills have an impressive win against the Dolphins, although the Dolphins haven't won before this past week. The Dolphins hadn't won a game in like 10 game weeks. And then they beat the Jaguars. It's not.
Which is such a crazy. I was like, that's the weirdest win, 47-10.
Yeah. So, the Jaguars are not a good team. Yes, they beat the Colts. I still don't think the Jaguars are a good team. And then they beat the Cardinals, which is debatably the best team that they've gone against all year, that they've won against, right? The Cardinals are, I don't know how to feel about the Cardinals. We're not going to talk about the Cardinals today. Despite that, having a win against the Dolphins and having a win, a Dolphins who doesn't have Tua, right?
Well, they had two in that, like, for half that game or something, right?
For like maybe half. I think it's less than half. And then beating the Jaguars is not that impressive, especially given how bad both of those teams have looked.
Well, beating the Jaguars was impressive for how much they beat him by, but yeah, the last 2 weeks, I mean, losing against the Bills and then losing against the Ravens and losing against the Texans, how they lost to them, where he went for like 9 for 30. This is like rookie year Josh Allen, where he couldn't complete a pass. And not all of it obviously was his fault, but such a weird game. I'm still not going to jump off the Bills bandwagon. They could easily bounce back against the Jets, like you said. There's a bunch of turmoil this upcoming game next week, next Monday night. Then they got the Titans, who knows who's starting for them, whether it's Will Levis or who started for them last week? That's another quarterback.
For the Titans?
Oh, no, Mason Rudolph. Mason Rudolph.
Yeah.
Their other guy. So they could bounce back, but I've kind of pegged them down a little bit from. I thought after that Jaguars win, like they had ball control. Josh Allen was throwing it really well. Defense playing good. I'm like, this could be like our Super Bowl favorite right here. I'm obviously pegging them down from that, like a tier or two down, to where I think they'll still make the playoffs. But Super Bowl team, from what we've seen the last 2 weeks, no. But I'm still on the Bills bandwagon.
All right. The other bandwagon that you were on a little bit more than me, New Orleans Saints. I think even without the Derek Carr injury, they were already on a pretty big slippery slide. They scored 90 points in the first 2 games. They haven't scored 90 points since then combined. I think they are looking like the team that everyone thought the New Orleans Saints were going to be. They don't have the most talented roster. I think this is just a team that needs some time to grow. I don't know how much growing you're going to be able to do with Derek Carr. Not because I think he's a bad quarterback, but because he's 33 years old. He's not getting any younger. Alvin Kamara is not going to be your number one running back in a year. He's not going to rush for 1,000 yards in a year. And, Chris Olave wouldn't really be the number one receiver on any of the top teams in the NFL right now. So these are all things that you can't fix in the middle of a season. It's not even something that you can fix in one off season. I think there's still a lot of gas left in the tank, but I'm not sure if there's enough gas for them to make it to the playoffs.
card hunt. To be fair, they only lost to the Eagles and the Falcons by combined 5 points total. So really close losses there, and obviously the Chiefs are the Chiefs, who have top three defense in the league. So I think they'll still be they'll still be there. I can see them honestly bouncing back against the Buccaneers. I don't know if Derek Carr is going to play or not.
He's
I know
not.
he's not. Okay,
Yeah.
or not. Okay, maybe not. Maybe not then if he's not playing. I mean, Taysom Hill is okay, but um, so it depends how long he's out. If he's out for like several weeks, maybe you're right. Maybe they're just gone. But if he's back in a couple weeks, other than against the Broncos, I can see them winning. A few games. Panthers are coming up, stuff like that. So, but yeah, I am off the Saints Super Bowl hype train.
Yeah, I am too. I'm back on the Vikings hype train.
Hey, 5-0 is 5-0.
Yeah, I mean, we'll ignore. We'll just look at the stats for the the Jets game. The Jets though, are they? We talked a lot about the Jets, but you had them going to the playoffs. I didn't have them going to the playoffs. But are the Jets done?
I would just stick with it for now. I know there's a lot of chaos, but I do think there could be a rebound effect just with like a new voice in the room kind of thing. So I'm really 50-50 on the game against the Bills next week. I think it could go either way, honestly.
Don't forget to do your pick'ems, by the way.
Oh, good call. I'll do them.
I'll remind you after the episode too.
Yeah, I'll do them later tonight. Um, but I'm still on them making the playoffs for now. I'm not going to go off that train. Um, so I'm saying all the trains.
Most
The
of them.
Saints train.
Yeah, I'm not sold on or off the Jets yet. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is a really talented quarterback, and while we do see a huge drop off in terms of quarterback play, as they age, we saw it with Brett Favre, we saw it with Peyton Manning, we kind of saw it with Tom Brady. I I don't I don't necessarily see that same kind of drop off with Aaron Rodgers. Yes, his numbers look worse now than they ever have. Not ever. I think this is like his second or third worst season he's ever had. But he's got two tough games ahead of him, playing a division game with the Bills right after firing your head coach, and then flying out to Pittsburgh, who has, despite not looking good, a very tough defense. Right now, the Jets have beaten the Titans, one of the worst teams in the AFC, and the Patriots, also one of the worst teams in the AFC. They really need to show something against the Bills or the Steelers. Losing against the Vikings when Sam Darnold's having the worst game of the year for him is embarrassing. But to lose it off of an Aaron Rodgers pick, that's not what a championship quarterback should look like. And I really need to see them bouncing back hard against the Bills or the Steelers before going against the Texans in a couple of weeks. Oh shoot, they go against the Texans on a short week too. That sucks for them. Holy shit.
Yeah, that's gonna be tough.
The other team that I was pretty high on, San Francisco 49ers. Terrible start. Obviously they're pretty injury ridden as well. They're not as bad as the Rams in terms of injury. But they've lost some heartbreaking games. They lost against the Cardinals. That's a heated division rivalry. And then they didn't do anything against the Vikings. And then they lost against the Rams in a game that they had a 21-point lead on. What were they? They were up 24. They were up 21-14. Or sorry, yeah, 21-7 in the middle of the third quarter before Matthew Stafford just had a miraculous run. That is a heartbreaking game. Again, another divisional game. Is it safe to say that the 49ers, and I'll mention this stat and we can get more into it later next week, but of the last 19 quarterbacks to make it to the Super Bowl and lose their first Super Bowl, none of them have ever returned. That doesn't look good for people like Brock Purdy, for people like Joe Burrow, both quarterbacks we've talked about, Jalen Hurts, and the 49ers are just a team that it just looks like they're not going to be able to make it. And they are on a time crunch right now. They're able to be as successful as they are because Brock Purdy is the least paid starting quarterback in the NFL right now. What's going to happen when his rookie contract is up? What's going to happen when Debo Samuels, or Christian McCaffrey, can't play anymore? What's going to happen when Trent Richardson retires? These are they're kind of in a do or die mode right now. We've talked about this last year too. They've only got 1 or 2 years left to be the Super Bowl caliber team, and they're kind of fumbling it away. They haven't had a hard schedule, but they only have 2 wins to show for it.
Yeah, no, for sure. They've also just been unlucky a little bit, to be honest. Like you said, 21-point lead against the Rams, fumbled that. Up against the Cardinals, fumbled that as well. I think the defense isn't as good overall. I think Fred Warner is playing really good, but I think overall the defense isn't
Yeah.
playing as good. I don't know if it's personnel, defense coordinator. I don't know. I don't exactly know. But obviously, like you said, tons of injuries. Yeah, I'm not off that bandwagon either. I think throughout the year, as long as they don't get more injuries, I think they'll get more people back, and they'll find their stride somewhere along the way. They obviously are not going to be as dominant as they were last year, but I think that they'll still make the playoffs, in my opinion. In the end, they'll find a way. I think Brock Purdy's playing pretty well. He's showing he can actually be successful without having to have all these stars around him. He's showing he's actually a good quarterback. You know, as far as where he ranks in the rankings, you could debate that, but I think he's a good quarterback. He's a pro. So I'm not off the bandwagon. The Niners are still really good, like personnel wise, as long as they get their everyone back. CMC, that's going to be tough because he brings that dynamic aspect of the offense from a pass catching standpoint. You don't get with Mason at running back. But you know, even if they don't get CMC back, I think they're still going to be a really formidable team. So
Yeah, I don't really think that there's any other teams. I mean, I guess we can briefly talk about the Eagles. Jalen Hurts is arguably having the worst year of his career so far. The Eagles, since their 10-1 start last year, has won I think like 3 games. Because I think they won one game after a 10-1 start. I don't remember. Um, Nick Sirianni is making a very big case to be a coach fired middle of the season this year as well. With the only other one being Doug Peterson for Jacksonville. Um, I've never been on the Eagles bandwagon, so I can't really say that I'm jumping off of it. I know you were kind of split between the Eagles being a good team or not. After 4 games, 5 weeks, do you have a definitive the Eagles are a good or a bad team?
no, I mean, I don't think I was not really on the bandwagon at all. So I'm more. I'm not gonna say they're a bad team, but I think they're more as a bad team than a good team. Yeah, I don't think they're. I don't think they're gonna make the playoffs. I don't think you think that. I think you think that as well, right? You think
Yeah.
they're going to be not in the playoffs. So I still feel the same way. They'll win some games. They upset a random team or whatever the case may be. But I think they're kind of like a 7-9 team this year. So
All right, and so are there any games that you're kind of excited about seeing this week?
uh, honestly, I haven't even checked overall. Well, the Jets Bills Monday Night Football, just to see what kind of happens to that division. I think is probably the biggest game of the week in that sense. Just has a lot of implications. Like Jets could be, like I said, leading that division after that game, or are the Bills going to bounce back after their just poor show of the passing attack last week? So I think that's probably what I would say is like a game like other than the Broncos game, like that's the game to watch, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the Chargers Broncos game is really interesting to me because the Chargers are secretly the number one team for points against. They've only allowed 50 points this year. There's a slight asterisk to that though because they played the Raiders week one, who only put up 10 points, and they went against the Panthers week 2, who will only put up 3 points. So I don't necessarily know if they have as good of a defense as that statistic says. Um, I will say that I think this game is gonna be closer to the Broncos Jets game of very low scoring, not a lot of production, than it is. I can't think of a high scoring game right now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be like 2017 kind of game or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think it, yeah, it's not going to be a shootout at all, in my opinion.
I think the Bills Jets game would be kind of interesting, for a similar reason. I'm not as big on the whole. I don't really like Aaron Rodgers, so I'm not as interested in that game as you are. Um, I think I think the game I'm probably most excited to watch though would be the Commanders Ravens game. You mentioned last year Lamar Jackson has a 21-3 record against NFC teams. The Ravens have a pretty good defense, and one of the things I wanted to talk about that we're not going to talk about today is Jaden Daniels and how impressive and how good he's looked. And I think this is going to be his first real welcome to the NFL game, right?
Yeah, it can't be like, best offense ever every single week, even though he wasn't as good last week. So I like the Ravens in this game.
Yeah, and I think it's gonna be a pretty good Ravens game, but it'll be. I think what's more interesting to me is how does Jaden Daniels bounce back from that in Week 7, right?
Yeah,
Um,
no, well, I mean, they still won like by a good margin. He just didn't play as well. Like he
well, no,
had
I
his
mean, I mean, I think
factors.
I think going against a team like the Ravens, which is by far the toughest team that the Commanders had to have gone against this year, and then they have they're giving a pretty there's no free games in the NFL, but as free as you can get against the Panthers, right after that. And so it's gonna be really interesting to see how Jaden Daniels bounces back from a game like the Ravens that you and I both I think are in agreement that the Commanders are not going to win.
Yeah, Ravens just trending up. I think he'll play well, but I think the Ravens are just going to be too good for him in this game. So
Otherwise, I don't think there's any other. It's not a bad week. I feel like you and I have had some pretty bad weeks of there's not really any games that jump out to us. That's not really the case here. I think these all look pretty good.
yeah, it's fine. I mean, the Monday night or the Sunday night game is just okay from just looking at it from a macro perspective. But with the Giants' big win, like we were saying earlier last week, and the Bengals like the best 1-4 team ever, it could be a good game. So that'll be solid.
All right, we this episode ended up being as fast as I thought, but I had a lot to say about the Aaron Rodgers, Robert Sala, Sala, Salad, Robert Salad
Yep.
thing. I've been ruminating about it all day today. Sorry for missing last week. Sorry for missing yesterday. Um, if there are anyone who's interested in joining our Pick'ems team, please let me know either in the comments or on Discord if you know me on Discord. Um, and we'll send you out an invite. We don't have a prize for whoever wins. So we have a budget of exactly $0. But you've been listening to the sports show. Thanks for listening.